Hello and welcome to our presentation. Utilizing the Gapminder World Graph, today we are going to take a look at how the income per person, or GDP per capita in a country, affects its suicide rate per 100,000 people. More specifically, we will take a closer look at a select few countries and their timeline of events which greatly influence dramatic changes in their overall suicide rate. Trends in national suicide rates are constantly influenced by economic recession, unemployment, as well as an increase in divorce rates and alcohol misuse. In Sri Lanka, this is no different. Sri Lanka is an island state situated off the south coast of India. Most of the people live in deep poverty and debt, and Sri Lanka is known to have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Piled so high with worry and fear, here suicide is just something people do. Suicide is just an impulsive thing. Beginning around 1959, the turquoise bubble representing Sri Lanka steadily moves upward on the graph. At 1977, there is a steep jump in suicides. In the same year, Sri Lanka adopts open economic policies which increases their imports on pesticides. Here, we find a connection between the suicidal method and an increasing amount of deaths. Pesticide self-poisoning is one of the most commonly used methods of suicide in Asia because people have such ready availability to these toxins, they are able to successfully act on their impulses. The marked decline in Sri Lanka's suicide rates in the mid-1980s and 1990s coincided with a series of legislative activities that systematically banned the most highly toxic pesticides that had been responsible for a majority of pesticide deaths in the preceding 2 decades. Although Sri Lanka's suicide rate is still higher than most, by taking away easy access, we can predict less deaths will occur due to medicated self-harm.
Hungary is a landlocked country in the center of Europe between Romania, Austria, and Slovakia. Today, Hungary has a high-income economy with a very high Human Development Index. Although suicide rates are overall high in Northern and Eastern Europe, the suicide rates are particularly high in Hungary, with the highest in the world for a majority of the time from 1960 to 2000. A lot of the reason behind the Hungarians committing suicide is because of the amount of social changes that has been happening in their nation. Hungary was under the rule of Stalin, which meant that they were communists and had no economic system, but that all changed once he was taken out of power. Since the 1960s, almost 60% of the people changed residence and social statuses because of the accelerated industrialization, in addition to breaking up the kinship system and family ties. As a result, people became isolated and alienated, and the suicide rates have been fluctuating ever since. Additionally, there was a political transition in 1988 which caused suicide rates to decline. But still, the rate in Hungary was among the highest, as 40 out of every 100,000 people would commit suicide. It was even encouraged, as people thought it was brave and heroic to end someone's own life. This is because the opening of the second economy meant that Hungarians had to do much more work to meet the new average standards because of the rise of GDP. Since then, the national GDP of Hungary has gone up and down over time, and the rise of suicide rates again increased in 2008, but had nothing to do with GDP.
As we can see from both of these two countries, many different variables and historic events play a big part in the suicide rate fluctuations. Even though Hungary was much better off economically, their struggle within the government took a toll as harsh as the impoverished and in-debt people of Sri Lanka. These two countries both had similar patterns in the quick rise of suicides, and since the beginning, Sri Lanka and Hungary had sufficient information on suicide rates. It's not until the late 1900s where the rest of the world finally joins in on the data. Since GDP technically cannot measure happiness, there is not a distinct negative or positive relationship between suicide rates and GDP per capita. Because even people in well-off situations can still be emotionally distraught and choose to end their life. In the future, we can only hope to see the colorful bubbles moving down on the Gapminder graph, decreasing the amount of suicides per year.